When I heard Mirror Mirror, an OG RWBY soundtrack from the original show. Yes, it's technically kind of a remix because it's not like they just played the original Jeff Williams, Casey Williams song. Instead, they had Pyrrha's Japanese voice actor sing it, but honestly, it was perfect. It was even more lonely than the original use of that song. This is what I love about this show right now, is that it's the perfect blend of new meets old. And I'm really happy because if you watch, I think it was last week's video where I did talk about how I knew there were some people who said they wish they heard the original soundtrack more, and I said the new soundtrack they got going on is absolutely incredible, so I don't find that to be an issue given that it's trying to be new anyway. But I have to say, the way they incorporated an old soundtrack in a new way has me excited to see if they would do that for any of the other tracks, because there's a few that I feel like would work really well in this dream nightmare world. And I'd honestly go as far to say this might be my favorite RWBY Ice Queendom episode. Now, if you've watched the videos that I've done over this, I've been pretty positive, all things considered. I very much love this new take of new meets old, but ultimately, my biggest issue has been pacing. That it feels like they really were kind of struggling, I guess, in order to kind of cover the old, but then get into the new content. And now that we're officially in the brand new content, it feels like they got the pacing down pat. I really enjoyed the fact that this was a very slower pace episode in comparison to prior episodes, and I wasn't even considering the possibility that after ending last week in the cliffhanger they did, RWBY versus Weiss building it up, they would rip her away and they'd re-enter the dream, which goes to show that this entire season is without a doubt going to be focused on Weiss's nightmare and getting her out of that dream. I highly doubt that midway through or partially way through the season they're going to move on to a different threat. They might, for like a final boss, fight the creature responsible for like the last couple of episodes after they save Weiss, but very much this is a personal story about going into her psyche, the way she looks at her family, the pressure that's on her, and honestly that's probably the best thing you could do for a RWBY spinoff that's trying to be new meets old that you could possibly do. I'd honestly go as far to say that what this episode did to me makes me at least twice as excited to see where they might go from here. I like having like the whole gang be a part of this because it's kind of needed, all things considered. I just was expecting that RWBY versus Weiss was going to happen and that Yang and Blake would come in after. But I like the idea of almost a reset, so now they have all their coins back except the one or two of them that they used. You really can get a sense that even though RWBY's the leader, she's new to being a leader at this point, and she's not very responsible when it comes to being conservative about sparing those coins, as she wants to use them willy-nilly. And if it wasn't for Yang and Blake kind of pulling her back, they probably would be down to half their pocket change at this point. So it's nice to see what all of them can do, no longer needing to make RWBY dolls to cause distractions. You can use Blake to do that. Yang, if they need to bust through doors or cause a distraction, she'll be great for that. And RWBY being the one trying to pull someone like Weiss back in is going to be that key to her heart. You can very much see that it wasn't all fake, given there is a sense of genuine compassion from things like, I've always wanted bunk beds. We can see that definitely wasn't a lie. But there's some darkness in this girl's heart, and being surrounded by a family like hers and the pressure that was put on her, it's no wonder that a demon would manifest inside her and really take hold and be the worst type of grim that we've dealt with in terms of RWBY, in my honest opinion. Maybe it's a bit of an exaggeration, as deeper into RWBY seasons, grim do get quite fascinating and pretty disturbing. But I honestly feel like whenever you deal with dreams or going inside someone's psyche, that's really the worst you can deal with, in my honest opinion, because it's harder to fight than a giant monster that looks dangerous and might be able to cut off your arm. This is something that you have to literally go inside their mind and soul to try to free them from, and there's no guarantee. It's interesting, though, because when it came to the Mirror Mirror moment, which is a original song in the RWBY soundtrack, I think it's effective with what it was used for in the original show, but there's something about having Pyrrha, of all characters, sing it, and it feels so much more lonely because not only is the reason she imprisoned and basically being called a silly or a dummy is that she obviously chose John over herself, so of course she would basically lock her away. But the way she went about performing that song, it just ate away at you in a way that it just felt so much more lonely. That she was being gawked at. She was a star attraction. She couldn't do anything. There was no fight scene. It was just a girl and her friends basically just performing this heartfelt song, almost asking to be saved, and how she's the loneliest of all, as you have certain images of Weiss being shown throughout. What a beautifully directed moment, and I didn't think I needed to hear any original pieces of music from the original soundtrack, but the way they kind of did it, it feels both new and old, which is kind of what the show in general is, right? Rather than just playing the original song like it was directed, which, don't get me wrong, the original RWBY soundtrack is an absolute bop, and both Jeff Williams and Casey Williams do an amazing job with it. But there's something about having, those original songs, but repurposed in this way. It really makes it feel perfect for the show that it's not just trying to, rely on nostalgia for those OG fans, right? No, instead, it's trying to say, there's a lot of great elements about that original show, and we're going to repurpose them for our own great new idea, and that's honestly the perfect way to go about this show. So it doesn't just feel like a cash grab of trying to be like, oh yeah, it's basically the same thing, but just done in 2D. No, they very much are telling a completely new and fresh story, and in fact, based on what we've seen, and one could suspect what we're going to see, the way they're going about presenting Weiss's character might even surpass the original for me in terms of how they're going about directing the family stuff so early, rather than taking volumes to get there. We didn't really have any action in this episode, all we kind of got was a taste of what the characters will look like. RWBY still has her scythe shooting backwards. Blake basically is kind of functioning normal. It kind of does feel like her weapon extends a little farther than it should, but maybe that's just how the anime is presenting it. But ultimately, it was kind of funny seeing how one of her cat ears was exposed, who just obliterates a forest with a single punch. It's kind of sad, but it's brilliant that RWBY got literally the shortest end of the stick. They all seem powered up, and she basically has a weapon that she's not going to be able to fight the exact same way she's used to. Because yes, she's still skilled at fighting, but she's used to using crescent rows in a very specific way, and now she has to redo her mental programming to do it backwards, which is going to be pretty fun. She gets a snowboard, obviously the motorcycle's there. It's just kind of hilarious to see how Weiss does view certain things, and sometimes it's comedic, other times kind of heartbreaking, all things considered. But this episode definitely, it feels like the pacing's here. Now that we're officially in that new content, we don't need to jump around as much as we used to. I mean, I was honestly expecting that once we saw that she was out of the fight scene, I thought they were just going to jump right back into doing it again, but they took their time this episode, and for me, that gives a very good sign of things to come, and it's going to be interesting to see how they want to wrap it up, right? Because you can definitely see a conclusion for this Weiss story, but given the way that creators have been talking about it, both on the Japanese side as well as Rooster Teeth's side, it feels like it's supposed to be a one-and-done season. So I'm curious to see, what they want to end it or how they want to end it. Because I still say, this is beginner-friendly. You could enjoy this as a fresh-time RWBY fan, but the difference between some shows where you could just be a beginner and leave it off, I feel like this is the type of show that you could start with this, but it is going to be required to go watch the original if you actually want to see a full RWBY story eventually. This just gives you, a new context and a new perspective while telling a new story all at the same time, but it's still such a fascinating take on something that, honestly, on paper, I would think would fail, but it feels like it has as much passion as the original, which is saying a hell of a lot. But thoughts down below, what did you think of this episode? Now that we're close to being halfway done this season, I very much am enjoying RWBY Ice Queendom and the new takes on New Meets Old, but thoughts down below, leave a like if you enjoyed and subscribe if you're new around here. Till next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.